Good morning. My name is Dominic Calabro, and I'm honored to serve as President and Chief Executive Officer of Florida TaxWatch. For the past 40 plus years, Florida TaxWatch has served as the eyes and ears of the taxpayers of Florida, as a research institute and government guide dog, bird dog, and watchdog. We just make sure we're not a lapdog. We also have with us today Kurt Winter, our Senior Vice President of Research, and is also the lead researcher on the annual Turkey Watch report. Thank you all for joining us today, those of you here present and those who are with us virtually, for the release of the 2021 Budget Turkey Watch Report, our annual independent review of state budget processes. It's an analysis of the transparency and accountability of the budget process. This report promotes additional oversight and integrity of Florida's budgeting process and is based on the simple principle that because money appropriated by the legislature belongs first and foremost to the people, taxpayers of Florida. So the budget process must be transparent and accountable, and every reasonable effort to make the appropriation proper, deliberative, and properly vetted. But first, we must admit that this was a budget like no other due to the COVID-19 health pandemic and the COVID-19 economic pandemic. They nearly shut down Florida's the Sunshine State economy. The impact on state revenues was immediate and severe, but shortly after, the Congress and the President acted with adding $5.8 billion in federal funds from the CARES Act. It allowed the state to avoid a budget shortfall in the prior fiscal year, which was ended June 30th of 2020, and carried significant general revenue into the current year that ends June 30th of 2021. Then the economy and state revenue really started to rebounding much quicker and stronger than we and almost everyone else thought. News arrived that even more federal funds were again on the way over. The result was that the 2021 legislature passed a record budget totaling $101.5 billion. And you've heard that before, but it blew past the $100 billion mark, $101.5 billion. That's $9.2 billion more than the current fiscal year, while keeping a record level of reserves. And those budget reserves are the gift that keeps on paying the taxpayers of Florida, keeps our costs of borrowing down, and we still maintain a AAA bond rating by all the bond rating agencies, and TaxWatch is very focused on that important outcome. This outcome was absolutely unimaginable just only months ago when a multi-billion-dollar shortfall was expected. So while all this available money allowed for significant potential for project turkeys, it could have been substantially worse. The number of member projects, both requested and funded, decreased considerably this year. And there were fewer projects added during conference negotiations through what they call the supplemental appropriation, or the sprinkle list, which we find rather amusing and inappropriate title. When coupled with some restraint shown in the face of windfall revenues, this helped reduce the number of budget turkeys. So Florida TaxWatch really wants to commend Speaker Sprouls and Senate President Simpson, as well as the appropriation chairs in both the House and Senate. We think they've done a really tremendous job in showing some good restraint and I think good stewardship. For the legislature was not adding any member project to the budget during the conference negotiations. This is actually a very rare occurrence, but one we think should be something done on a continual basis. There were some projects added back to the budget process through the sprinkle list. And at this time, I'd like to turn this over to Kurt Winter, our Senior Vice President. And if for just a little historical perspective, between the two of us, you've got over 81 years of service to the people of Florida. Kurt? I don't want to say who's got the 80 part of it.
Yeah, 60 of those are Dominic's. Thank you, Dominic. The $101.5 billion budget passed by the Florida legislature for fiscal year 21-22 contains 116 items qualifying as budget turkeys. It's worth $157.5 million. In dollars, this is similar to the amount Florida TaxWatch recommended to be vetoed last year, when we suggested Governor DeSantis veto 180 projects totaling $136.3 million. The dollar amount is similar, slightly higher, but the number is far lower than last year. Budget turkeys are often local member projects placed in the final appropriation bill without being scrutinized and subjected to the budget committee process, or that circumvented existing grant and other legislatively established selection processes. Now, it must be noted that the budget turkey label does not signify judgment of a project's worthiness. Instead, the review focuses solely on the integrity, accountability, and transparency of the legislatively established budget process. The goal of this report is to ensure that all appropriations of hard-earned taxpayer money achieves its intended public benefit. The 116 turkeys we've identified in this year's report are only a portion of the 675 member projects in the budget worth more than $560 million. While the appropriations project rules adopted 5 years ago have reduced the number of budget turkeys, they have clearly not limited the number of member projects. Although there were fewer this year than last, the number is still excessive. Florida TaxWatch believes these appropriation project rules should be continued and improved upon to increase accountability for spending in the budget. Another concerning issue we identified is the use of supplemental appropriation lists during the budget process. These lists are referred to as sprinkle lists. They surface and are approved in the last minute, virtually the last minute, with no discussion. The Senate list contained 150 items worth $165.5 million. The House had 76 items worth $182.2 million. This means that $347 million in hard-earned taxpayer dollars were spent almost as an afterthought after all of the various budget areas had been closed out. It should be noted that this year, a significant amount of the supplemental appropriation was additional funding for established statewide programs. And while there were a lot of member projects, there's fewer than last year. Additionally, we identified a number of member projects while not meeting our criteria for budget turkeys. We're recommending that the governor give extra scrutiny. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Dominic to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Kurt. Last year, Governor DeSantis, I think, vetoed 82% of our list. In prior years, generally an average about 67, 70%, been as high as 91% and as low as I think a little under 50%. Through the years, since I think we've been doing this on a recurring basis since 1986. We did one in 1983, but from 1986 on, so this is our 35th anniversary, I guess, doing it. There's been $3 to $4 billion that have benefited and saved the taxpayers. You know, every dollar spent by the legislature deserves to go through the thoughtful and appropriate process. So it's always disappointing when we see more than $250 million approved without the spending scrutiny that we believe it truly deserves. So Florida TaxWatch strongly urges the legislature to discontinue these supplemental funding lists moving forward. Additionally, we are also recommending that the legislature implement more competitive selection processes for member projects, especially one for local transportation projects, to help ensure that these items are funded with a coordinated statewide vision and that they compete for limited funding done in a fair manner as well as an accountable manner and gets the best results for the taxpayers of Florida. Listen, we want to make sure the legislature has ample opportunity to have the say that they rightly deserve as the appropriations in the process. But like everything else, it shouldn't just simply be power makes right. We want to make sure it's fair, thoughtful, it's integrated, and that once those appropriated items are funded, that they can be ensured that they can be expended for the purpose for which they were established. Once they're appropriated directly in the budget, that's it. There's really little other accountability for a particular member project. So that's why extra care and thoughtfulness has to go in. You can say, well, they won't get it again, but what do you do with the $500,000 or $1 million, a couple $1 million that they may have gotten in the meantime? So it's really important that this process, which is actually to ensure the accountability. And we think it's actually, this has been a tremendous year. The legislature has been very, very good to the taxpayers of Florida. We've got major tax initiatives that took a long time and we feel really good about, and want to commend again the Speaker, the Senate President, and appropriations chairs, as well as the Finance committee chairs of both the House and Senate. They did a marvelous job. Since our founding in 1979, Florida TaxWatch has proudly served as our state's trusted government watchdog and fiscal policy leader, providing taxpayers and Florida's leaders thoughtful recommendations to secure enduring fiscal accountability and strength for the Sunshine State, even through its darkest days. And about a little more than a year ago, we thought they were the darkest days. Throughout Florida's battle against the COVID-19, again, the health pandemic and the economic pandemic, Florida TaxWatch has remained dedicated to this role and provided ongoing assessment and value-added policy recommendations that really were favorably acted on, and helped our government's response to this crisis and help Floridians lead out of this dilemma. Florida TaxWatch will never stop fighting for the taxpayers of Florida. And we're proud to continue that important work today with the release of the 2021 Turkey Watch report. We look forward to working with Governor DeSantis and our state House and Senate leaders to implement these measures and accountability to ensure the accountability of every tax dollar is spent and ensure the greatest taxpayer return on investment for Florida's families.
Hey, Dom, you mentioned the dark fiscal days that we experienced this time last year. The governor may handle the use of his veto pen. Process notwithstanding, the big reason governor's veto line items is to provide fiscal certainty, given the fact that
and restraint.
Your word, given the fact there could be deficits on the horizon. So you mentioned there are record reserves now. From a fiscal prudence standpoint, what incentive does the governor have here to veto anything, given the fact that we have record reserves?
Integrity to the budget process, to ensure that there's a collective vision, to ensure that the state of Florida acts in a coordinated fashion, to ensure that the taxpayers' hard-earned money is accountable. This is, you get given $101 billion. I think the taxpayers want to make sure that every single dollar is spent with a thoughtful vetting process to ensure that they, as the owners of government, are getting their money's worth. So I think he has, as his predecessors have, a very, very strong incentive to ensure that.
Does politics factor into that, given the fact that we've got a gubernatorial re-election campaign coming up next year? He has a base, and a big part of that base are fiscal conservatives. Do you think he's looking to the political environment as well?
Governors, actually legislators, cabinet members, all elected officials, it's a convergence of art and science, if you will, both politics and policy. This Turkey Watch report, I think, really helps to kind of combine good policy to the politics of governing the taxpayers' hard-earned money. So I think he has the incentive, and I think he's expressed that. We're actually saying we're giving the governor some discretion, saying don't veto necessarily everything on that list. Last year, we said absolutely because of the pandemic. He's got a little bit of leeway here. We're saying these are strong suggestions. And we've talked with their office, as we have repeatedly. And again, many of the criteria that this governor and other governors have used for the last 35 years have been developed using these criteria in mind. So great question, Troy. Mike?
Say that, there's only one no vote on the budget, all 158, I believe, voted on it, 57 that voted on it. That one no vote, if he voted no because there's too much money, what does that say about everybody else's yes vote? That everybody got a piece? Or?
Mike, oftentimes the budgets are, this time it's a little bit more bipartisan, but they're usually passed with substantial majorities. They've made probably political rather than policy vetting of the various ideas. They had a lot of money, and I thought, Troy, where you were going with this is a lot of this is because of the federal funds that came to Florida. We have tens of billions of dollars that we didn't have, and that happened with every state. It's just how well we use it. And I think Florida's been a better steward of those tax dollars, the federal funds that came to us, than other states. But nonetheless, we're retaining our strong AAA bond rating and substantial reserves, and we're meeting really so many of the major priorities of the state of Florida. So I think they've done a really good job. We had some major tax reforms in legislation, so we feel that this is one of the better sessions for the taxpayers of Florida and Florida TaxWatch in many, many years. Are there any questions on the?
Yeah.
Hey, Dominic,
Yes, sir.
this is Bruce Ritchie with Politico.
Hey, Bruce.
Hey, you all have let the water project slide in recent years, and the governor has not been vetoing. This governor has not vetoed them, but this year you're calling for scrutiny of them. So I want to make it clear: you're not asking the governor to veto them, and why is it now they're getting this look again?
Well, I'm going to turn it over to Kurt, but hey, Bruce, is a good question. Last year was a hard, like every single item on their veto. This year there's a little bit more discussion because we're not in quite a dire circumstance. And that's really why. But we think the governor should exercise his restraint and veto each of these. But nonetheless, there's a little bit more discussion, if you will. Sounds like you're talking on both sides of your mouth, but so I guess I am. Be very candid about it. But Kurt, you want to clarify that? It's his idea.
We have said the same thing about the water projects for a few years now. It's one of the areas where there's a lot of member projects and there isn't really an established process for selecting them. So they don't qualify as budget turkeys unless they show up in the conference committee report. So we've asked the governor to give special scrutiny for that. We think that's really important this year because, as you know, the legislature passed the bill that creates both the wastewater grant program, or funds that with a lot of money, and also the Resilient Florida grant program. Several of the projects in the water project area probably could have gotten funding through those. And, the governor and the legislature has had water as a main priority now for a couple of years, put a lot of money into it. There's a lot of drinking water, wastewater programs to get funding. So, we're saying, one, create a new process where DEP actually reviews, prioritizes, and recommends projects for funding. But in the meantime, the governor should take a close look at most of them and see if they fit with the statewide vision for water quality.
Bruce, let me go to the mic. Bruce, I think it's a good point. We've said in various times in various years, sometimes we had a turkey pan, and it just depended on circumstances in various years, the last 35 years. In this case, though, one of the most important things we find is to establish thoughtful budget processes for these growing list of projects. So it's not simply parochial and catch as can, so that we could set what are the higher priorities, make sure that there's some sense of fairness across the states. It's not all located in just a powerful legislator's district. And so the importance of the processes to hold agencies accountable, not agencies, but to hold the recipient of those funds accountable, so they perform really the function of aiding a core function of state government. It's not about just simply distributing money to your community because you'll be recognized for it. These are hard-earned tax dollars, and there are a lot of competing, and even with all the funds we provided, there's still lists that could be funded. There's still more we could put in early childhood learning. There's still more we could put in education. There's still more we could put in our college system. There's still more that we could put in core functions of government. They did a really, really good job, but there's still much more that can and must be done. So improving the processes, and I think the governor's office understands that and appreciates that role, but the legislature did a really good job. Having said that, Troy, there's still restraint that has to be exercised. And this is the final opportunity that the governor has. Florida is one of the very important states. I think it's helped to our fiscal integrity and our fiscal standing by having that line item veto process. There's no system at the national level. And Florida is one of the very, very few states with the aid of Florida TaxWatch that allows our governor to do that. We've been happy to play an important role. It's been a pretty effective one, but most importantly, we're relying on Governor DeSantis to continue the really good stewardship he's provided to date, and we think he'll take these recommendations very seriously and act on many of them.
How does the top line number here, Don, compare to your previous recommendations in prior years? Out of $101 billion budget, 157 doesn't seem like a lot.
No, it's not, Troy. It really isn't. It's a pretty small number. The absolute number, we can give you that list, and actually got it through the years. We've had 4 years where there was zero. Okay, two with Governor Childs, I think either one or two with Governor Bush. We've had some that there were very, very few, depending on the times and circumstances. But 157 is 157 million is 157 million too much. And still there's a lot of member projects that, they went through the process, they were sort of vetted, but not in a way that you'd really say that was really thoughtful vetting process. But overall, a pretty small percentage. But that doesn't mean that the remaining 99% of the budget is ivory soap and clean as can be. It just says that these are the processes. We had got very tight, very rigorous processes to review them. And still, there's still $157.5 million worth of projects that the governor ought to seriously consider vetoing. Kurt?
I had something. Yeah, Troy, I just wanted to add, 5 years ago, they passed the appropriation project rules, or they adopted them. That has reduced the number of budget turkeys considerably because one, it gets them, it happens every once in a while, but it's supposed to prohibit adding new member projects in the conference. It also gets them in earlier. There's more information. It's more transparent. So that has limited the number of budget turkeys. It has not limited the number of member projects.
And of course, member projects that are always defended as that member knows what's best for his or her district. But as you said, it was a 370 million
47.
sprinkle list.
Oh, the sprinkle list was 350. But one thing I wanted to mention about the sprinkle list is there was a lot of money in there this year for established statewide programs, such as the $80 million for the iBudget waiver. So there was a lot of money there that we wouldn't normally have a problem with because it's just adding money on to existing programs. We think that's okay at the end of the session when you realize how much money you have. What you don't want to do is add new projects, particularly local narrow projects.
Again, we think they did a really good job. I mean, just plain and simple, it's our job to be critical. We are. We also want to be fair and thoughtful. And but still, 157 to 157 million. Bruce, there's a Mark. I'm sorry, Mark Harper. Is this a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the sprinkle lists point and just ask basically could you explain what a sprinkle list is and how that works in the process, and I guess why that's a concern in this particular year?
The sprinkle list, or what the legislature calls supplemental funding lists, happen at the very end of the budget conference. Basically, after they've closed out the budget, they can look and see, we might have some money left over. And then what they do is decide what they're going to do with some of the extra dollars. And a lot of times they'll just add it to money to a project that's already in the budget, which isn't as bad as adding a new project. But they do add new projects. Most of them tend to be member projects. This year, in the number, it was mostly member projects. But there was a lot of other established spending on statewide programs. But they come in virtually at the very last thing the budget conference does. After everything's been closed out, they bring up these two lists. They don't really even discuss them or read them. They just say, we have our supplemental list. They have their supplemental list. We accept them both. And that's how it's done. And that closes the budget conference process.
I want to give a little context and perspective. Many years ago, Curtis Peterson was Senate president, and he came to one of our founders, Mark Hollis, and said, Mark, I'd like your help in getting a city park funded from the state budget, Lakeland City Park. And so Mark said, this doesn't happen anymore, but back in the day it did. He said, well, Curtis, why do we need the state to pay for a city park? Okay, Mike, to kind of answer your question, who knows, what best. So it's about the roles and responsibilities. As it turns out, it was a thoughtful question. And they did not fund, the legislature did not fund a city park with state tax dollars. It's now called the Mark and Lynn Hollis and Barney and Carol Barnett Park, which is funded out of private and philanthropic funds. So the point is, there's a lot of good projects out there, but if it's a city or county, in many cases, unless there's a process that allows you to kind of compete and say, here's a proper role for the state to play in restoring county courthouses or restoring important cultural and arts facilities or water projects or roads. Unless there's a coordinated, thoughtful, competitive process, it's willy-nilly. It's not vetted. It's not really well thought out. So it's not by its nature going to use the highest and best use of those funds. So that's the nature of the sprinklers.
Hey, Don,
Yes, Bruce?
hey, I wanted to follow up on that is, do you think, and it almost seems like an obvious question, is the sprinkle list and the water projects list, all these local projects, are they just being used to buy unanimity in support of the budget? Basically, everyone's getting a piece of the pie and they can claim it. And therefore we're really not having budget debate or budget votes.
I'll let you handle that.
Just let me handle it. Thanks, Kurt. Bruce, it's a good question. I think you really need to ask them. I can't answer it. Whether that is the case or not, we're just saying it shouldn't be there. It's just that simple. Whether it's to grease the process, which has historically been the case, or not, they shouldn't be there. And we should use better use of the tax dollars. They did a really darn good job. They just could have done better. But we do acknowledge what they did, what they could have done, what they in fact did, and so many of the wonderful things of for example, e-commerce and avoiding a 700% increase in the tax rate on small employers and helping the bring down the business rent tax from 5.5% down to 2%, a long-standing key priorities of Florida TaxWatch through the years, and also providing, most importantly, it's a taxpayer penalty relief act. Taxpayers were on the hook because of Wayfair for what were 50% penalties and interest. And now that liability is moved from the user, the Florida resident, small business owner, retiree, and family to the large out-of-state remote seller. So it's actually a taxpayer penalty relief act. And we're very proud to play an important part of that as well. Folks, we want to thank you. We'll be here for more questions if you have any. Thank you very, very much. And what an incredible week we have ahead of us. Thank you very much.